I smelled home before I saw it. That particular combination of diesel fuel, blackberry bushes, and wood smoke that meant the Ashford place. My 18-wheeler groaned as I downshifted, taking the narrow access road off Highway 126 at 20 miles per hour, because anything faster would bottom out the rig on the washboard ruts. 3 days hauling Douglas fir from the Cascade lumber mills to processing plants in Eugene. And all I wanted was a shower hot enough to steam the road grime off my skin, and maybe 8 hours of sleep that didn't involve listening to lot lizards, propositioning truckers at the Flying J. The farm appeared through the trees like it always did, gradual and familiar. 20 acres of struggling berry fields my grandfather had planted in the 60s, back when people still believed you could make an honest living off the land if you just worked hard enough. The main house sat at the center, a craftsman-style structure that had been white once, but now wore a weathered gray that matched the Oregon clay. Devon's truck was parked near the equipment shed, covered in the fine red dust that coated everything out here during dry season. I could see her in the far field, bent over the irrigation lines with that particular posture that meant something had broken again, and she was fixing it herself, rather than calling Jim Holloway for help. Pride ran deep in our family, sometimes deeper than sense. I pulled the rig into the wide turnaround near the barn, setting the air brakes with a hiss that sent the chickens scattering. Except they didn't scatter. I sat there in the cab for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the birds through my dusty windshield. They'd moved away from the sound, sure, but just barely, shuffling a few feet and then stopping, clustered together near the coop door like they were waiting for permission to exist. In all my 39 years, I'd never seen chickens act like that. Devon's chickens were half-feral things that would chase you across the yard if you had feed in your hands and scatter like buckshot if you didn't. I climbed down from the cab, my knees popping in a way that reminded me I wasn't 20 anymore. The October air had that particular chill that comes to the foothills in late afternoon, when the sun's still out but the shadows know something you don't. My boots hit the packed dirt, and I stood there, stretching the kinks out of my back, breathing in air that didn't smell like truck stop coffee and other people's cigarettes. "You're early," Devon called, straightening up from the irrigation line. She was 36, but looked older in the right light. Or maybe it was just that we'd both aged faster, since Mom and Dad died 3 years back. The farm had a way of extracting years from you, trading them for survival one season at a time. She walked toward me, wiping her hands on jeans that were more patch than original denim, and I noticed she kept glancing toward the tree line, not looking at it exactly, more like keeping it in her peripheral vision, the way you'd watch a dog you didn't quite trust. "Made good time," I said. Weather held clear through the passes. "Uh-huh." She stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to talk, but maintaining distance like she'd forgotten how to be near people. I recognized that posture because I'd caught myself doing the same thing at truck stops, keeping everyone at arm's length. "Marcus, the chickens won't leave the coop." I noticed. I mean, they won't leave it even when I put feed out. Haven't for 3 days now. And Rex... She stopped, her jaw working like she was chewing on words she didn't want to swallow. "Rex won't go past the clearing anymore. Tried to take him to check the far fences yesterday, and he just sat down and started whining. I've never seen him refuse before." Rex was a Belgian Malinois mix, 60 pounds of muscle and enthusiasm that Dad had gotten as a puppy right before the cancer diagnosis. That dog would chase anything that moved and had tracked injured deer into brush so thick you needed a machete to follow. If Rex wouldn't go into the woods, something was wrong. I looked past Devon toward the tree line, maybe 200 yards from where we stood. Second growth Douglas fir mostly, mixed with some cedar and hemlock, thick enough that you couldn't see more than 50 feet in. We'd grown up playing in those woods, knew them like some people knew city streets. I'd kissed Jenny Patterson against a cedar trunk when I was 16, had hunted deer through those slopes every season since I was old enough to carry a rifle. The woods had never felt threatening before, just present, the way mountains are present, old and indifferent to human concerns. But looking at them now, I felt something in my stomach tighten, just slightly, just enough to notice. The way you notice when a familiar room has been rearranged in the dark. Everything where it shouldn't be, even though you can't see it. Probably just a bear, I heard myself say. Which was stupid because we both knew what bear sign looked like, and this wasn't it. But saying it out loud made it manageable. Turned whatever was happening into something with a name and a solution. Fire season probably. Pushed one down from higher elevations. Devon's expression said she didn't believe me, but she nodded anyway because we were both good at pretending things were fine when they weren't. 3 years of keeping the farm alive on credit and determination had taught us that skill. Yeah, she said, probably. Where's Rex now? Under the porch, won't come out. I walked to the house, my shadow stretching long across the dirt, and crouched down to peer into the darkness beneath the porch. 2 eyes reflected back at me, and Rex's tail thumped once, half-hearted. Hey, buddy, I said, making my voice gentle. Come here. The tail stopped thumping. Rex's eyes were wide, showing white around the edges, and his ears were pinned flat against his skull. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me toward the woods, and his lips were pulled back just enough to show teeth. Not aggressive. Afraid. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That ancient primate warning system that predates language. I straightened up and turned around, following Rex's gaze. But there was nothing there except trees and shadows, and the perfectly normal sounds of afternoon in the foothills. A crow called somewhere distant. Wind moved through the upper branches with that particular whisper that fir trees make. Everything was exactly as it should be, except it wasn't. Devon had moved to stand beside me without my noticing, and her voice was quiet when she spoke. You feel it too. It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer. We stood there together, brother and sister, watching the woods watch us back, and I thought about how silence has texture. The silence before a thunderstorm feels different than the silence of snow. This silence felt like held breath, like something waiting. I've been hearing things at night, Devon said. Something moving through the trees, big, breaks branches that deer can't break. How big? Big enough that I can hear it from inside the house when the windows are closed. I chewed on that information, turning it over in my mind like a stone with strange markings. Could be elk. They get down into the foothills sometimes. Could be. But her tone said she'd already considered and dismissed that explanation. Marcus, have you noticed the coyotes? I had actually, now that she mentioned it. The drive up the access road had been too quiet. Usually around dusk, you'd start hearing them warming up for their nightly chorus, that ascending wail that people found creepy, but I'd always thought was just practical communication. Checking in, establishing territory, letting each other know who was where, but I hadn't heard a single yip since I'd turned off the highway. "When's the last time you heard them?" I asked. "Over a week ago. Maybe 9 days." Devon hugged herself, hands rubbing her upper arms like she was cold even though the temperature was still in the 60s. "It's been quiet at night. Really quiet. No coyotes, no owls, nothing. Just that sound of something moving, and then not even that for the past 2 nights." I wanted to tell her she was overreacting. Wanted to make a joke about too much time alone making her jumpy. Wanted to do anything except acknowledge that my own instincts were screaming that something was wrong. But I'd learned years ago that Devon's instincts were usually sharper than mine. She'd known Dad was sick before any of us. Had seen it in the way he moved months before the diagnosis. She'd known Mom wouldn't make it through the winter after Dad died, had started grief counseling before the funeral, because she'd understood what the rest of us hadn't, that Mom's heart had broken in a way bodies couldn't survive. If Devon said something was wrong, something was wrong. "Show me where you heard it," I said. We walked the property as the sun dropped lower, our shadows stretching and merging with the longer shadows cast by the trees. Devon led me to the equipment shed, a pole barn structure where we kept the tractor, the ATV, tools, and enough spare parts to keep our aging machinery limping along. The shed sat maybe 30 yards from the tree line, close enough the branches overhung part of the roof. "Here," Devon said, stopping at the northwest corner. "I came out to get the post hole digger 3 mornings ago, and there were tracks." She pointed, and I crouched down to look. The dirt here was softer. Clay mixed with decomposed fir needles that held impressions well. What I saw made my mouth go dry. The tracks were canine-shaped, roughly 4 toes, claw marks, a pad. But they were massive, easily 6 inches across and just as long. A big dog might leave a track half that size. What made my skin crawl wasn't the size, though. It was the impression in the pad itself. In the center of the main pad, pressed deep into the clay, were what looked like finger marks. 3 distinct ridges, parallel, like whatever had made this track had gripped the ground the way you'd grip a basketball. I reached out to touch the track, then stopped myself, some deep instinct warning me against it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took pictures from 3 angles, the flash making the shadows in the impression stand out stark and wrong. "That's not a bear," Devon said. "No." I took 2 more pictures, zooming in on those finger-like impressions. "No, it's not." "So what is it?" I had no idea. In all my years, hunting these woods, working timber operations throughout the Cascades, driving logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance since Roosevelt's first term, I'd never seen anything like this. I thought about all the tracks I knew: deer, elk, black bear, cougar, coyote, bobcat. I thought about the stories old-timers told at the mill, the ones that got traded around loading docks at 3 in the morning when guys were too tired to maintain their skepticism. Stories about things in the woods that didn't fit into field guides. I stood up, my knees cracking again, and looked at the tree line. The sun was touching the tops of the mountains now, that particular moment when daylight starts losing its argument with darkness. The woods were filling with shadow from the ground up, like someone was pouring ink between the trees. "We need to call Fish and Wildlife," I said. "Get someone out here who knows what they're looking at." Devon nodded, relief visible in the way her shoulders dropped. She'd been carrying this alone for over a week, and I felt a stab of guilt for being on the road, for leaving her here to face whatever this was by herself. That was the thing about long-haul trucking. It paid enough to keep the farm running, but it meant one of us was always alone out here, vulnerable. We walked back to the house as darkness settled in, and I found myself checking over my shoulder every few steps. The woods were perfectly still, perfectly quiet, perfectly wrong. When we reached the porch, Rex was still underneath it, and he still wouldn't come out. That night I called Fish and Wildlife from my cell phone, standing in the kitchen while Devin made dinner. The guy who answered, sounded bored, like he'd been fielding stupid calls all day, and mine was just another one. "Bear tracks," he said after I described what we'd found. "Probably a big boar coming down from higher elevations. They can leave prints that look weird when the ground's soft." "This didn't look like a bear track," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. The shape was wrong, and there were these impressions in the pad that looked almost like fingers. Yeah, I've heard that before. Papers rustled on his end. "It's just how the pad distorts in certain soil conditions. Nothing to worry about. Bear'll move on once it realizes there's nothing easy to eat on your property." "What about the livestock acting strange?" "The dog won't go near the woods. Animals got instincts. They can smell predators humans can't." More rustling. "Look, Mr. Ashford, we haven't had any bear reports in your area, and honestly, if there was a bear that size causing problems, we'd know about it. People would be calling in. My advice is to secure your garbage, bring in any pet food, and the bear will move along. If you see it again, give us a call, and we'll send someone out to take a look." The line went dead, and I stood there staring at my phone, feeling dismissed and stupid. Devin looked at me from the stove, questions in her eyes. "They said it's probably just a bear," I told her. "Said to call back if we see it." "Did you tell them about the coyotes?" "Didn't get a chance." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten family dinners as kids, where Dad had taught me to field dress trout, where Mom had done 1,000 jigsaw puzzles during the years when her hands could still manage the pieces. Guy didn't want to hear it. Probably thinks we're paranoid country people seeing shadows. Devin turned back to the stove, her shoulders tight. "Maybe we are." But neither of us believed that. Outside, full darkness had arrived, and somewhere in those woods, something that left tracks too big for dogs and too wrong for bears was moving through the shadows. I thought about those finger impressions in the clay, and I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I woke before dawn, Devin's old rooster alarm jarring me from dreams about tracks that walked themselves deeper into the ground while I watched. I'd slept in my childhood bedroom, same twin bed I'd had at 15, same water stain on the ceiling shaped like Florida. Some things change, and some things just wait. I found Devin in the kitchen already dressed, coffee pot gurgling its morning song. She looked like she'd slept about as well as I had. Purple shadows under her eyes, and that particular tightness around her mouth that meant she'd been grinding her teeth again. "I'm going to walk the perimeter," I told her, pouring coffee into Dad's old thermos. "Check for more tracks. See if I can figure out what we're dealing with." Devin nodded without looking at me, staring out the window toward the tree line. "I'll get the chickens fed. Maybe today they'll actually come out." They didn't. I watched from my truck as Devin opened the coop door and scattered feed across the yard. calling them the way she always did. Usually the birds would explode out like feathered shrapnel, fighting over the best spots. Today they edged to the doorway, heads bobbing with that nervous bird uncertainty, and refused to cross the threshold. After 10 minutes, Devon gave up and dumped the feed inside the coop, and I heard her swearing as she walked back to the house. I spent 3 hours walking the property line with my phone camera and Dad's old Nikon, documenting everything that looked wrong. I found more tracks near the northeast corner, these ones heading into the woods rather than out. The stride length between prints was massive, at least 6 feet, which meant whatever made them had legs, long enough to cover ground faster than any natural predator I knew. I photographed them from every angle, took measurements with a tape measure I'd grabbed from the shed, even pressed my own boot next to one for scale. My size 12 looked like a child's shoe beside that track. The woods themselves felt empty in a way that wasn't natural. I'd grown up hunting these slopes, knew them in all seasons and weathers, and I'd never experienced this particular quality of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, of prey animals frozen in their hiding spots, of an ecosystem that had learned something new about fear. I pushed maybe 50 yards into the tree line, following a game trail I'd walked 100 times before. The Douglas firs rose around me like cathedral pillars, their bark deeply furrowed and smelling of pitch and thyme. Normally, this far in, you'd see signs of life everywhere. Deer droppings, squirrel middens, bird nests, the scraped bark where elk had rubbed their antlers. Today I saw nothing. No scat, no territorial markings, no sign that anything had passed through here in days. Even the spider webs across the trail looked old and abandoned, their silk grayed with dust. I found the place where something had bedded down in a depression between 2 root systems. The ferns were crushed flat, and the moss showed the outline of something large that had lain there long enough to compress the vegetation into the shape of its body. The outline was wrong, though, too long for a bear, too broad through what would have been the shoulders, and at the head end, the moss showed a shape that looked more canine than anything else, elongated with a distinct muzzle impression. I took pictures until my phone memory was nearly full, then stood there in the green shadows, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every rational explanation my mind offered felt like it was wearing a costume, dressed up as logic, but hiding something else underneath. A bear wouldn't leave tracks like that. A cougar couldn't make those stride lengths. A pack of feral dogs would leave multiple tracks, not this single set of prints that appeared and disappeared like something that knew exactly where to step. I thought about calling Jim Holloway. He'd lived in these foothills for 60 years, had worked timber operations back when they were still using steam donkeys to haul logs. If anyone would know what could leave signs like this, it would be Jim. But I could already hear how that conversation would go. Hear the pause before he responded. The careful tone he'd use that meant he thought I was either drunk or losing it. We'd already had to ask Jim for help too many times since Mom and Dad died. Borrowing equipment, getting advice on irrigation repairs, once even asking for a short-term loan to cover property taxes when a haul got delayed. I couldn't show up at his door talking about monster tracks without evidence that would hold up to his practical, seen everything skepticism. So instead I walked back to the house, my camera full of photos that proved something had been on our property but didn't prove what it was. Devin was in the barn organizing tools. That particular kind of busy work people do when they need to feel productive but can't focus on anything that matters. I found her reorganizing the same shelf of wrenches she'd already organized twice. "Find anything?" she asked without turning around. "Tracks, lots of them. Something bedded down in the woods, too." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos. "Dev, I don't know what this is." She took the phone from me and scrolled through the images, her expression getting tighter with each swipe. When she got to the photo of the bedding site, she stopped scrolling and just stared at the screen. "That's not a bear," she said finally. "No." "So what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. Call Fish and Wildlife again and get dismissed? Call the sheriff and sound crazy? Post the photos online and wait for armchair experts to tell us it was a hoax or misidentified coyote prints? Every option felt equally useless. "I'm going to set up the trail camera," I said, "the one we used for deer season last year. Put it where we can get a clear view of the approach from the woods." Devin nodded, handing back my phone. "I'll help you set it up after lunch. And Marcus?" She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since we were kids and she'd come running into my room after a nightmare. "I want you to get your rifle out. Clean it, load it, keep it close." "Devin, please." Her voice cracked slightly on the word. "Whatever this is, I don't think it's going to just move on." So that afternoon we mounted the trail camera on a fence post facing the tree line, positioning it to cover the most likely approach route to the barn and equipment shed. The camera was a nice one, a Browning Strike Force that could shoot clear video even in low light. Motion activated with a detection range of 80 feet. I'd bought it 2 years ago when we were having problems with raccoons getting into the feed storage, and it had worked perfectly for that. Now I was hoping it would show me something that would make sense of all this. Some rational explanation I could point to and say there. "See, it's just a bear, or it's just dogs, or it's just something ordinary wearing a disguise." While I worked on the camera mount, Devin walked the property with a roll of surveyor's tape, marking spots where she'd seen or heard something wrong. By the time she finished, we had orange tape on 7 different locations, forming a rough semicircle around the house and barn, every marker representing some moment when her instincts had screamed danger. Looking at those markers made my stomach tight. Whatever was happening wasn't random. The pattern suggested something that was learning our property, testing our boundaries, figuring out where we were vulnerable. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning my rifle, a Remington 700 in .30-06 that Dad had given me for my 16th birthday. The repetitive work of running patches through the barrel, oiling the bolt, checking the scope mount, gave my hands something to do while my mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of tracks that shouldn't exist. When I finished, I loaded 5 rounds into the magazine and kept the rifle leaning against the wall by the back door, close enough to grab in seconds. Devin made dinner, but neither of us ate much. We sat at the kitchen table pushing food around our plates while the sun dropped lower outside, painting the windows gold and then orange and then the deep red that meant twilight was coming. I watched the tree line through the window and I swear I could feel it watching back, impatient and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. "Maybe we should call Jim," Devin said finally, "and tell him what?" "The truth. That something's been on the property, that the animals are terrified, that we found tracks we can't identify." I thought about it, rolling the idea around in my mind like a stone in a tumbler, looking for the sharp edges. "He'll think we're paranoid. Or he'll come out here, look at the tracks, and tell us the same thing Fish and Wildlife did, that it's just a bear and we're overreacting. But what if he believes us? Then what? What's Jim going to do that we can't do ourselves? I pushed my plate away, appetite gone completely. We're adults, Dev. This is our property, our responsibility. We can handle whatever this is. Devin looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe, or fear, or just exhaustion at being the responsible one for so long. You sound like Dad. Is that a bad thing? Dad died trying to do everything himself. Wouldn't admit he was sick until it was too late to do anything about it. Wouldn't ask for help, even when he could barely stand. She stood up and carried her plate to the sink, her back rigid. Sometimes asking for help isn't weakness, Marcus. Sometimes it's just smart. She left the kitchen and I sat there alone, watching darkness fill up the world outside. She was right, of course. Dad had been a stubborn son of a bitch who'd worked himself literally to death rather than admit he needed help. But I wasn't Dad, and this wasn't cancer. This was something else. Something that left tracks in the dirt and made our dog hide under the porch. Something that could be dealt with through practical means if we just stayed calm and thought it through. I believed that right up until I saw the eyes. Full darkness had fallen by the time I went out to check the irrigation lines. Devin had mentioned one of the timers was acting up, running too long or not long enough. She couldn't remember which. Normally I'd have waited until morning, but I couldn't sit in the house anymore, couldn't stand the weight of those walls pressing in, while I pretended everything was fine. Sometimes you just need to do something, anything, even if it's stupid. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out across the berry field, the beam cutting a pale tunnel through the darkness. The field was maybe 2 acres, planted in neat rows that ran perpendicular to the house, the bushes stripped now of their fruit and waiting for winter dormancy. The irrigation lines ran along the base of each row, black polyethylene pipe with emitters every few feet. The whole system controlled by a battery-powered timer box mounted on a post at the far end. The walk across the field took maybe 3 minutes, my boots scuffing against the hard dirt between rows. I could see the timer box in my flashlight beam, its little green LED winking at me through the darkness. I was 50 feet away when the hair on the back of my neck stood up, that ancient warning system firing off alarm bells my conscious mind hadn't processed yet. I stopped walking, just froze mid-step, every sense suddenly screaming attention. The night was silent around me. No insect sounds, no bird calls, not even the rustle of wind through the berry bushes. Silent the way a forest gets when a predator moves through it, when every living thing suddenly remembers what fear tastes like. I swept my flashlight across the field, the beam jerking a little because my hand was shaking. Nothing. Just rows of berry bushes throwing shadows. The equipment shed a dark bulk to my right. The tree line, a wall of black, maybe 100 feet ahead. Everything looked normal, looked exactly as it should. Then I turned the flashlight toward the far side of the field, toward a spot about 20 feet to the left of the timer box, and there they were. Eyes. 2 of them, reflecting my flashlight's beam back at me with that particular eye shine you get from tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind the retina that helps animals see in low light. Except these weren't the red eye shine of a coyote or the green glow of a deer. These were amber, bright, and almost gold, like coins catching firelight. And they were wrong. My brain tried to process what I was seeing, tried to fit those eyes into some category that made sense. Dog, it said. Must be a dog, Maybe one of Jim's hounds got loose. Except Dog's eyes are maybe 2 inches apart, and these were wider. 4 inches at least, maybe more, I couldn't tell from this distance, but the spacing felt wrong, the way a wrong note sounds wrong in a familiar song. They were also too high off the ground, way too high. I'm 6'1", and those eyes were looking at me from somewhere around my chest height, maybe 5 feet off the dirt, which meant whatever they belonged to was either standing on something or was just built wrong, proportioned in a way that violated the basic rules of how 4-legged animals are supposed to work. I stood there, flashlight steady now, despite the fear making my guts liquid, and I watched those eyes watch me. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stayed fixed on me with a focus that felt intelligent, predatory, like I was being evaluated, like something was deciding whether I was food or threat or just entertainment. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Time gets weird when you're facing something your hindbrain recognizes as a predator. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to break eye contact and bolt for the house. But some deeper part of my mind knew that running was the worst thing I could do. Running was prey behavior. Running would trigger a chase response. So I stood there, trying to control my breathing, trying to slow my heartbeat, trying to look bigger and more dangerous than I felt. I thought about the rifle leaning against the back door, 200 yards behind me. Might as well have been 200 miles. Finally, and I don't know what triggered it, the eyes moved. Not away, not a retreat, just shifted slightly to the left and then back, the way a person might adjust their stance. The movement was fluid, controlled, nothing like the jerky head movements of a dog or coyote. And in that moment, in that small repositioning, I understood with absolute certainty that whatever was out there was bipedal. It was standing on 2 legs, not 4. It had shifted its weight from one foot to the other the way humans do, the way nothing in the natural world does, except primates and birds. My mouth went dry. My knuckles ached where I was gripping the flashlight too hard. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the eyes were gone. No movement, no sound of something crashing away through the brush. No indication of where or how it had vanished. 1 second they were there, reflecting my light with that amber glow. And the next second there was just darkness and my own ragged breathing. I ran back to the house. Didn't walk, didn't maintain my dignity, just flat out sprinted across that berry field like every nightmare I'd ever had was chasing me. My flashlight beam bounced wildly ahead of me, showing me nothing but my own terror reflected in the jerking shadows. I hit the back porch, hard enough to rattle the boards, yanked the door open and slammed it behind me, throwing the deadbolt with shaking hands. Devin appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. "Marcus, what?" "It's out there." I couldn't catch my breath. My chest was heaving and my legs felt weak, adrenaline making my whole body shake. "I saw it. Its eyes. Jesus Christ, Devin, I saw its eyes." She grabbed my shoulders, steadying me. "Where? Where did you see it?" "Far side of the berry field, just standing there watching me." I tried to slow my breathing, tried to think through the panic clouding my mind. "It's not a bear, it's not a dog. It was standing upright, Dev. 7 feet tall at least, maybe more." "Are you sure? It was dark, maybe." "I'm sure." I pulled away from her and went to the window, but I couldn't see anything beyond the reflection of the kitchen lights. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like it was thinking. Like it knew exactly what it was doing. Devin's face had gone pale. We need to call someone, the sheriff, Jim, someone. And tell them what? That I saw glowing eyes in the dark? I laughed, a high, desperate sound that didn't sound like my own voice. They'll think I'm drunk, or crazy, or both. Then what do we do? I turned back to the window, pressing my palms against the glass, like I could push the darkness back by will alone. Out there, somewhere in that darkness, something that shouldn't exist was walking around our property on two legs. Something with amber eyes and the intelligence to know when it was being watched. Something that had stood there evaluating me the way a hunter evaluates a deer before deciding whether to take the shot. We wait, I said finally. We wait and see if the trail camera caught anything. And we don't go outside alone after dark. Not anymore. Devin nodded slowly, and I saw her glance toward the rifle by the door. And if it comes closer? I didn't have an answer to that. Not one I wanted to say out loud, because the truth was, I didn't know if bullets would stop something that could move like that could make all the wildlife disappear just by existing nearby. I didn't know if anything could stop it. That night we stayed up together in the living room, all the lights on, the rifle across my lap. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Every creak of the house settling, every sound from outside, every movement of shadow in the windows made us both jump. Rex stayed under the porch, and I couldn't blame him. Around 2 a.m, I heard it. Distant, somewhere deep in the woods, the sound of something large moving through the brush, breaking branches with a crack that carried across the still night air. Not moving fast, not rushing, just moving with casual confidence. The sound of something that owned the darkness and knew it. Devin heard it too. I saw her head turn toward the sound. Saw her hands clench on the armrests of her chair. "Marcus," she whispered, "how big would something have to be to break branches that sound like that?" I thought about the Douglas firs out there, some of them old-growth trunks that had survived logging operations. I thought about the sound those branches made when they broke. "Big," I said, "real big." The sounds continued for maybe 15 minutes, moving in a rough arc around the property, staying just inside the tree line. Patrolling, I realized, with a cold certainty that made my stomach drop. It was patrolling the perimeter, learning our property's boundaries, mapping out what belonged to it and what belonged to us. If that line meant anything at all anymore. When the sounds finally stopped, Devin and I looked at each other in the harsh fluorescent lights of the living room, and I saw my own fear reflected in her face. Whatever was happening here, whatever had come down from the mountains or up from some darker place, it wasn't going away. And the explanations I'd been clinging to, bear, dogs, natural predator, were crumbling like wet paper. Because bears don't stand and watch you with amber eyes at chest height. Dogs don't move through the forest like they own it. Natural predators don't make every other animal in a 5-mile radius go silent with fear. This was something else, something wrong, and it was getting closer. I looked at the rifle in my lap and wondered if it would be enough. Somehow I didn't think it would be. The next morning I checked the trail camera with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Devin stood behind me, close enough that I could feel her breathing over my shoulder as I pulled the SD card and loaded it on my laptop at the kitchen table. "Please let there be something," she said. "Something that makes sense." The first dozen files were normal. A raccoon nosing around at dusk, a deer passing through around midnight, the usual nocturnal traffic. Then the timestamp hit 1:47 a.m. and my stomach dropped. Static, pure white static filled the frame, like the camera had been pointed at a television between channels. But I could see shadows moving through the interference, dark shapes that shifted and moved with terrible purpose. The next frame was the same. Then the next. 15 consecutive images, all corrupted, all showing that same distorted movement behind the digital snow. Then at 2:03 a.m., the images cleared. The camera showed empty woods, the infrared giving everything that flat gray quality. But something was different. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. Every branch and frame, every single piece of brush at ground level, was pushed back away from the camera, bent outward in a perfect circle, about 8 feet in diameter, like something massive had been standing directly in front of the lens, close enough to block it completely, and its body had displaced everything around it. Jesus Christ, Devin breathed. Marcus, what could do that? I zoomed in on the ground, visible at the bottom of the frame. There, pressed deep into the mud, were the tracks. The same ones I'd found by the equipment shed, but these were crystal clear in the infrared. Canine-shaped, yes, but those weren't pads. Those were finger joints, knuckle impressions, the heel of a palm. Each track was easily 10 inches long, and they were spaced in a walking stride that measured close to 4 feet. Nothing walked like that. Nothing natural. Devin's phone rang, making us both jump hard enough that I nearly knocked the laptop off the table. She answered, listened, and I watched her face go pale. That was Jim Holloway, she said after she hung up. His hunting dog didn't come home last night. He found it this morning at the edge of his property line. She swallowed hard. He said it looked like something ripped it apart. Not ate it, not killed it for food, just tore it to pieces and left it there. Jim's place was 3 miles south of us through the woods. If you knew the old logging roads, you could walk it in under an hour. Something was moving through this entire area, and it was killing as it went. I called Fish and Wildlife again, got the same bored ranger I'd talked to before. Sir, we've had no bear sightings in your area. If you're losing livestock, you probably have a coyote problem. Set some traps, use better fencing. This isn't coyotes. I have tracks that don't match anything. Email us photos and we'll take a look when we can. We're pretty backed up right now with fire watch. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the dead phone, feeling something cold and terrible settling into my chest. We were alone with this. Whatever it was, whatever was happening, no one was coming to help because no one would believe it until they saw it themselves. And by then it might be too late. We should leave, Devin said quietly. Just pack up and go stay in town until whatever this is moves on or someone deals with it. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to agree with her, to load up the truck and get away from this place and whatever was circling it in the darkness. But this was our land, our family's land. Mom and Dad had worked themselves to exhaustion, keeping this place running, and they'd left it to us because they trusted us to hold on to it. If we abandoned it now, even temporarily, we might never get it back. The bank was looking for any excuse to foreclose. We can't, I said, not yet. We've got the late berry harvest coming in. That's $3,000 we can't afford to lose. Marcus, there's something out there that's killing animals for sport. I know. I stood up, moved to the window. Full daylight now, everything looking normal and safe and utterly unthreatening. Hard to believe that in darkness this place transformed into something else entirely. But we can't just run every time something scares us. We'll be careful. No one goes outside alone. We're armed at all times. And I'm setting up more cameras, better ones, with battery backup so they can't be interfered with. Devin didn't look happy, but she nodded. What choice did we have, really? This was our lives now, our livelihood, our last connection to our parents. We couldn't just walk away from it. I spent that afternoon reinforcing the chicken coop and checking every lock on every building. Rex followed me, but his behavior worried me. He stayed within 3 feet at all times, pressing against my legs, whining low in his throat whenever I got near the tree line. His ears were constantly back, his whole body radiating fear. I know, boy, I told him, scratching behind his ears. I feel it too. Because I did feel it. That sensation you get when you're being watched, when predator eyes are tracking your movement. I felt it constantly now, a prickling awareness on the back of my neck that made me turn around every few minutes to scan the woods. I never saw anything, but the feeling never went away. That evening I was bringing in firewood when I saw them. The tracks, they were in the dirt behind the equipment shed, fresh enough that the edges were still crisp and clearly defined. But these weren't like the ones I'd found before. These were a trail, a clear path that came out of the tree line, circled the shed completely, then moved toward the house before veering off toward the barn. I followed them, my heart hammering, my mouth dry as sand. The tracks showed where it had stopped at the kitchen window, where it had stood, probably last night while Devin and I were in the living room on the other side of the house. The impressions were deeper here, like it had stood in place for a long time, looking in. Then the trail moved to the barn, circled it twice, and approached the livestock pen where we kept the goats. It had stood at the fence. I could see where its hands, because they were hands, unmistakably not paws, had gripped the top rail. The wood showed claw marks, deep gouges that had stripped away the weathered gray surface to reveal fresh pine underneath. It had stood there evaluating our animals like a man examining cuts of meat at a butcher shop. The tracks left the pen and moved to the propane tank we used for the weed burner, circled it. One set of prints showed where it had crouched down low, maybe getting a closer look. Then the trail headed back into the woods, following our access road for about 50 feet before cutting into the tree line. I stood there as the sun dropped toward the horizon, staring at those tracks, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just an animal passing through our territory. This was reconnaissance. This was intelligence. Whatever this thing was, it was learning our property, our routines, our vulnerabilities. It knew where we kept our food, where we kept our fuel, where we slept. It had spent last night mapping out our entire homestead while we cowered inside with false security lighting. "Devin," I called out, keeping my voice level. "Come here. Bring the camera." She appeared in the doorway, saw my face, and went back inside. She returned with her phone and the rifle, which told me everything I needed to know about how much her nerves had frayed. She photographed the tracks from multiple angles while I measured them. 10.5 inches long, 4 inches wide at the widest part, with 5 clear toe impressions and those horrible finger joint marks in the pads. "It was here last night," I said. "While we were inside, it walked around the entire property." "Oh, God." Devin's voice was small, tight. "Marcus, this is more than just some animal wandering through. This is..." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. We both knew what this was. This was hunting behavior. This was stalking. We went inside before dark, locked every door and window, loaded the rifle and my shotgun, and waited. The security lights came on as the sun set, flooding the yard with harsh sodium vapor yellow. I'd never been so grateful for electric lighting in my life. But as darkness deepened beyond our little island of light, I kept thinking about those tracks, about how they'd circled the propane tank, about how they'd stopped at the kitchen window, about the intelligence required to do what this thing had done, to scout, to plan, to understand what it was looking at. Around 9 p.m., the dog started going crazy. Rex lost his mind, barking at the back door, hackles raised, teeth bared, making sounds I'd never heard from him before. Not warning barks, terror barks. The barks of an animal that knows it's encountering something higher on the food chain. I grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, keeping to the side so I wouldn't be backlit. Devin killed the interior lights, plunging us into darkness that made the security lights outside seem even brighter by contrast. At first I saw nothing. Just the empty yard, the barn, the equipment shed, all bathed in that sickly yellow glow. Then movement at the far edge of the light's reach, where the illumination began to fade into shadow. Something was there, standing at the boundary between light and darkness, just visible enough to make out its basic shape. Tall, too tall, standing on two legs, with a posture that was almost but not quite human. The proportions were all wrong. The arms too long, the shoulders too broad, the head too large, and the wrong shape entirely. "Do you see it?" Devin whispered. "Yeah, I see it." It stood there, motionless, for maybe 30 seconds. Then it moved forward just a few steps, coming closer to the light. And I saw it clearly for the first time. The head was canine, but not like any dog or wolf I'd ever seen. The snout was too long, too pronounced, filled with teeth that caught the light when it opened its mouth slightly. But it was the placement that made my skin crawl. That wolf-like head sat on a neck that came up from shoulders, positioned like a human's, not a dog's. The skull was massive, easily twice the size of any wolf's, with ears that stood erect and swiveled independently, tracking sounds with predatory precision. But it was the hands that destroyed any last hope of rational explanation. They hung at the end of those two long arms, and in the security light I could see them clearly, human-shaped, with 5 fingers and an opposable thumb, but stretched and distorted, tipped with black claws that curved like a raptor's talons. The fingers were too long, the proportions nightmare wrong, but they were unmistakably hands, not paws. Hands. The creature raised one of those hands slowly, deliberately, and I saw the muscle structure in its arm shift and bunch under dark fur. The hand turned, palm facing us, fingers spreading. It held that position for a moment, like it was waving, like it was showing us what it had, what it could do. Then it stepped back into the darkness and vanished so completely it might have never been there at all. "Marcus." Devin's voice was shaking. "What the fuck was that?" I couldn't answer. My throat had locked up. My hands were trembling on the rifle stock, and my entire body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to get away from this place and whatever walked its boundaries in the dark. Every instinct built into me over millions of years of evolution was firing at once, telling me I was prey, that something higher on the food chain had just shown itself, had just announced its presence and its intent. Rex had gone completely silent, I looked down and saw him pressed flat against the floor, belly to the ground, not making a sound. The silence was somehow worse than the barking had been. "We need to call someone," Devin said. "The sheriff, Fish and Wildlife. I don't care if they believe us or not." "And tell them what? That we saw a giant dog standing on 2 legs?" My voice came out harsher than I intended. "They'll think we're crazy, or worse, they'll think we're making it up for attention. You know how people in town already look at us, Dev. The Ashford kids struggling to keep their parents' failing farm running. They're just waiting for us to fold so they can buy the land cheap. If we start talking about monsters in the woods, they'll have us committed or laughed out of the county. Then what do we do?" I looked at the rifle in my hands, looked at the darkness beyond the windows where something impossible had just stood and deliberately shown itself to us. We defend this place. We stay inside after dark. We stay armed. And we make it clear we're not easy prey. "You really think we can fight that thing?" Honestly, no, I didn't. The creature I'd just seen stood close to 8 feet tall, was built like something designed by evolution to kill, and had enough intelligence to scout our property and understand what it was looking at. But what choice did we have? Run and lose everything? Live in town and watch this place fall apart while whatever that thing was stayed out here, possibly moving on to easier targets? The thought made me cold. Because if we left, if we ran, someone else might encounter it. Hikers on the old logging roads, hunters in the woods, kids from town on a dare. Someone who didn't know what was out there, who didn't have weapons or lights or any preparation at all. At least we knew. At least we'd seen it and understood the threat. That had to count for something. We stayed up all night again, taking turns watching the windows. The thing didn't come back, or if it did, it stayed beyond the reach of our lights. But around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood freeze, scratching. Low down on the outside of the barn wall, the side closest to the house. Long, slow scratches, like claws dragging across wood. Then silence, then more scratching from a different location. Then silence again. It was testing. Finding weak points. Seeing how we'd react. Learning the sounds that made us nervous. Playing with us the way a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. When dawn finally came, I went out to check the barn. Devin stood watch with the shotgun while I examined the walls. I found the claw marks easily. Deep gouges in the siding, running in sets of 5, spaced exactly like fingers. They were everywhere, on the barn, on the equipment shed, on the fence posts around the livestock pen, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, carved into our property like territorial markings. But it was what I found near the house that made me understand how much danger we were really in. On the kitchen windowsill, pressed into the dust that had accumulated there, was a single handprint, perfect and clear, with 5 fingers and a palm. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own hand, with those claw marks at each fingertip. And it was on the inside of the windowsill where the window frame met the house wall. The thing had reached through the gap under the window. While we were inside, while we were awake and armed and watching. It had reached through and left its mark to show us it could, to tell us that our walls and locks and lights were just suggestions it was choosing to respect for now. I didn't tell Devin about the handprint. I wiped it away before she could see, but I knew. And the knowing sat in my gut like a stone. We weren't defending this place. We were being contained. We were in a cage, and something was pacing around the outside, deciding when to reach in and take what it wanted. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with the rifle, watching the windows, waiting. Around midnight, Rex started whining. Not barking, not growling, just a constant, high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. He stared at the back door, at something I couldn't see, and that whine went on until I wanted to scream at him to stop. Then, from outside, I heard a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a growl, low and deep, that started almost below the range of human hearing and rose until it filled the air, resonating in my chest like thunder. But underneath the growl, woven through it, was something else. Something that sounded almost like speech, like words in a language that human throats were never meant to form. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds. When it stopped, the silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no night birds, no wind in the trees, nothing. The world had gone dead quiet, like all of creation was holding its breath. I realized, sitting there in the dark with a rifle that suddenly felt like a child's toy, that we had crossed some invisible threshold. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just hunting us anymore. It was communicating. It was telling us something. And the message was clear. This was its territory now, and we were here by its permission alone. The attack came on a Tuesday night in late October. I'd been sitting in the living room for 3 hours watching the windows, the rifle across my lap. Devin was upstairs in her room. She'd given up trying to convince me to sleep. We both knew I wouldn't. The air had that brittle quality it gets before the first real cold snap, and there was no moon. Just darkness pressing against the glass and the pools of light from our security floods reaching maybe 30 feet before dissolving into shadow. Rex hadn't stopped whining since sunset. That constant, nerve-shredding sound that made me want to throw something at him, just to get him to stop. But I couldn't blame the dog. He knew. Animals always know when something's wrong, when something's out there that shouldn't be. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. when the power went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout, just instant, complete darkness. The kind of black that feels solid, that presses against your eyeballs. The hum of the refrigerator died. The gentle whir of the heating system went silent. Even the LED standby lights on the electronics winked out. For maybe 3 seconds, there was nothing but that absolute darkness and my own breathing, too loud in my ears. Then Rex started barking. Not his normal bark, but something wild and panicked, high-pitched yelps mixed with snarls. I heard him scrambling across the kitchen floor, his claws skittering on the linoleum, and then he was at the back door, throwing himself against it hard enough that I heard the wood crack. "Marcus?" Devin's voice came from upstairs, thin and scared. "Stay in your room," I called back, and locked the door. I moved to the window, and trying to let my eyes adjust, the rifle up and ready even though I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. Outside, in the distance, I could hear something moving through the barn. Not sneaking, not trying to be quiet. Heavy footfalls, deliberate and measured, and the sound of wood splintering as something was torn apart. My barn, my equipment, my livelihood being destroyed by something that shouldn't exist. Rex's barking reached a fever pitch, and then it stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. Mid-bark. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. "Rex?" I said, knowing it was stupid, knowing the dog couldn't answer even if he was okay. There was a sound from the back door. A wet sound like meat hitting pavement. Then something dragged across the wooden porch, slow and heavy, accompanied by a smell that made my stomach turn. Copper and rot and something else, something wild and musky that bypassed my brain and went straight to the primitive part of me that still remembered being prey. I fumbled for the flashlight I'd left on the coffee table, found it, flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, and I pointed it at the back door. The door was still closed. But in the gap underneath, in the inch of space between the door and the threshold, I could see something dark spreading across the floor. Liquid, thick and viscous, pooling on our kitchen linoleum. Blood. Rex's blood. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh Jesus Christ." From outside, maybe 20 feet from the house, came that sound again. The growl that wasn't quite a growl, that had those almost words woven through it. But this time, it was louder, closer, and I could hear the distinct sounds underneath the inhuman vocalization. Consonants, syllables. Something that might have been my name if my name was being spoken by something with a mouth full of teeth and a throat that had never been meant for human speech. The rage hit me then. Sudden and white hot, burning through the fear. This thing had killed my dog, had terrorized my sister, had marked my property like it owned us, was destroying everything my parents had built, everything Devin and I had worked to keep. I moved to the back door, checked that it was locked, then turned and went to the gun cabinet. Devin kept telling me the rifle wouldn't be enough, and she was probably right. But Dad's old 12-gauge was in there too, and a box of slugs. I loaded it with shaking hands, 4 shells in the tube and 1 in the chamber, then stuffed my pockets with the rest of the box. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Devin was on the stairs, a flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. Like a knife would do anything against what was out there. "It killed Rex," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "It's destroying the barn. I'm not going to sit here and let it take everything." "Don't go out there, Marcus, please. We can call..." "Call who?" I turned to look at her, and whatever she saw in my face made her stop talking. "Sheriff Landry, who thinks we're paranoid? Fish and Wildlife, who told us it was just coyotes? Nobody's coming, Dev. Nobody's going to help us. It's just us." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." "No." "It's my farm too. Our farm. I'm not letting you go out there alone." We didn't have time to argue. From the barn, I heard the sound of metal being torn, the shriek of twisting steel. The tractor maybe, or the irrigation equipment. Thousands of dollars of damage happening every second. "Fine," I said, "but you stay behind me, and if I say run, you run. You get in your truck and you drive to Jim Holloway's and you don't look back. Understood?" She nodded again, though we both knew she wouldn't run. Ashfords don't run. Dad had said that back when he was alive. Ashfords don't run, don't quit, don't back down. It was family pride, stupid and stubborn, and it was probably going to get us both killed. I grabbed a second flashlight and handed it to her, then moved to the back door. Through the window, I could see nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of the porch furniture. The blood had stopped spreading. Most of Rex was probably out there, torn to pieces on the porch he'd spent 3 years guarding. I unlocked the door and pushed it open fast, bringing the shotgun up in the same motion. The flashlight beam swept across the porch, and I saw him. What was left of him. I won't describe it, I can't. But I understood in that moment what we were dealing with. This wasn't an animal defending territory or hunting for food. This was cruelty. This was something that killed because it wanted to, because it enjoyed the fear and the pain. Devon made a sound behind me, a choked sob, and I wanted to tell her not to look. But it was too late. We'd both seen, and we'd both carry that image for the rest of our lives. I stepped over Rex's remains, trying to ignore the wet sound my boot made, and moved into the yard. The security lights were out, but the flashlight beam reached far enough to show me the path of destruction. The chicken coop had been torn open, the wire mesh ripped apart like tissue paper. Feathers everywhere, white and brown scattered across the dark earth like snow. The barn doors were hanging off their hinges, and I could hear movement inside. Heavy breathing. The scrape of claws on concrete. "It's in there," Devon whispered. She was right behind me, close enough that I could feel her shaking. "I know." I moved toward the barn, the shotgun leading the way, my finger on the trigger. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to get back in the house, to run as far and fast as I could. But I kept walking, one step, then another, then another. The barn entrance loomed ahead, a rectangle of deeper darkness in the night. The smell was stronger here, that musk mixed with blood and something else. Fear, maybe. Or maybe that was just my own fear, so thick I could taste it. I stepped through the doorway. The flashlight beam swept across the interior of the barn, catching glimpses of chaos, overturned equipment, scattered tools, deep gouges in the wooden support beams, and blood. Everywhere dark smears across the floor and walls. My tractor was on its side. The heavy diesel machine flipped like a toy. That should have been impossible. That thing weighed over 2 tons. "Where is it?" Devon's voice was barely audible. I didn't know. The barn wasn't huge, maybe 40 by 60 feet. But there were stalls, storage areas, a loft above. Plenty of places to hide. Plenty of places for something to wait in ambush. I moved deeper into the barn, the shotgun sweeping left and right as I walked. Behind me, Devon's flashlight beam joined mine, the two lights crisscrossing through the darkness. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow and deliberate. Coming from above. I looked up. It was in the loft. I could see its shape against the darker shadows, crouched among the hay bales we'd stored for winter. 2 points of light reflected back at me, eyes amber-colored, too far apart, too high up. "Get out," I said to Devon. "Right now. Get out of the barn." "Marcus, go." She ran. I heard her footsteps retreating, heard her stumble and catch herself, heard the barn door creak as she pushed through it. Good. At least she'd have a chance. The thing in the loft shifted, and I heard hay cascading down to the barn floor. It was moving, coming down, and I brought the shotgun up and fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash lighting up the barn for a split second. In that instant of light, I saw it clearly for the first time. God help me, I saw it. It was descending from the loft, moving down the support beam with an agility that something that size should not have possessed. And it was huge, bigger than I'd thought, bigger than anything should be. 8 feet tall at least, maybe more, covered in dark fur that was matted and thick. The head was wrong, all wrong. A wolf's snout, but elongated, stretched out, with a mouth that seemed to go back too far into its skull. The ears were pointed and mobile, tracking sound. The eyes were yellow and round-pupilled, filled with an intelligence that was worse than any animal rage could have been. But it was the body that made me understand what I was looking at. This thing wasn't a wolf standing upright. It wasn't a bear or a mutant or anything that evolution had created. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders too broad and muscular, the chest too deep, the arms too long and ending in hands. Actual hands with 5 fingers tipped with black claws that curved like scythes. The legs were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's hind legs, but muscular enough to support the creature's weight when it stood upright. It was built for killing. Every line of its body, every muscle, every tooth, all of it designed by something to hunt and kill and tear apart prey. And right now, I was the prey. The shotgun blast had hit it square in the chest. I'd seen the impact, seen fur and flesh explode outward, but it barely slowed down. It finished climbing down from the loft and stood upright on the barn floor, maybe 15 feet away, and looked at me. Then it moved. I'd never seen anything that large move that fast. 1 second it was standing by the support beam. The next it was coming at me in a loping run that ate up the distance between us in less than a second. I fired again, hit it again, saw the wound appear in its shoulder, and it didn't stop. I threw myself sideways, rolled, came up and fired a third time from maybe 6 feet away. This time the slug caught it in the side of the head, and finally it staggered. Blood, dark, almost black, sprayed from the wound, and the creature made a sound that was half roar and half something worse, something with syllables in it. It turned toward me, and in the flashlight beam I could see the damage. Half its face was gone, the fur burned away, the bone underneath showing. And it was still coming. I scrambled backward, fumbling for another shell, trying to reload with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The creature took a step toward me, then another, moving slower now, but still moving, still alive, still conscious and aware and hunting. My back hit the wall. Nowhere left to go. The thing raised one hand. God, it had hands, fingers that flexed and grasped, and I could see the claws, each one as long as my thumb. It opened its mouth, showing teeth that belonged on something 3 times its size, and that sound came out again, that almost speech. I got the shell into the chamber and brought the shotgun up, knowing it wouldn't be enough, knowing I was about to die here in my own barn. Then Devon was there. She came through the barn door at a dead run, holding something in both hands. The industrial propane torch we used for burning weeds and clearing brush. She'd lit it somehow, gotten it going, and she ran straight at the creature with the blue flame roaring. "Get away from him!" she screamed. The creature turned, saw her coming, started to move toward her instead. And Devon didn't slow down. She crashed into it, shoving the torch flame directly into its face, into the wound I'd opened up with the shotgun. The thing's scream was inhuman, beyond animal. It was a sound of pain and rage and something else, something that might have been surprise. It staggered back, pawing at its face, and Devon kept coming, kept the flame on it, her face twisted into an expression of fury and terror combined. I found my feet, brought the shotgun up again. "Dev, get clear!" She dropped and rolled, and I fired, then fired again. Both barrels, both slugs, point blank into the creature's torso. It went down on its knees, still making that awful sound, and I could see smoke rising from where the flame had burned it. "The tractor," Devon gasped. "The diesel tank. It's ruptured." I understood immediately. The barn floor was concrete, but it was old concrete, cracked and uneven. And diesel fuel was pooling beneath the overturned tractor, spreading out across the floor, the smell of it suddenly overpowering everything else. The creature was trying to get up. Even with half its face destroyed, even with multiple gunshot wounds, it was trying to stand. One hand went down to the concrete, those fingers spreading wide, supporting its weight. Its hand went into the pool of diesel. I looked at Devon. She looked at me. We both looked at the propane torch still burning in her hands. "Run," I said. We ran. Out of the barn, across the yard, away from the building. Behind us, I heard the creature roar again, heard it coming after us. Then Devon turned and threw the propane torch. The explosion wasn't like the movies. It wasn't a neat fireball. It was a rolling wave of flame that blew out the barn windows and ripped the doors off their hinges. The concussion knocked me off my feet, sent me tumbling across the dirt. My ears were ringing, and I couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine. But I could see. Oh God, I could see. The creature came out of the barn on fire. The diesel had splashed onto it, and now it was covered in flames, running across the yard in no particular direction. Just running, driven by pain and instinct. And it was screaming. That sound again, those almost words, but stretched out and agonized. It ran past us close enough that I could feel the heat, close enough that I could see its eyes still tracking us even as it burned. Then it was past, heading for the tree line, leaving a trail of fire behind it as burning diesel dripped from its fur. It disappeared into the woods, and we could still hear it for maybe 30 seconds. We heard it crashing through the undergrowth, heard the branches breaking, heard that screaming. Then gradually, the sounds faded, grew distant, finally stopped altogether. Devon and I lay in the dirt, watching our barn burn. There was nothing we could do about it now. The structure was fully involved. Flames reaching 20 feet high. Smoke pouring into the night sky. All our equipment, all our tools, everything we needed to keep the farm running. Gone. "Is it dead?" Devon asked. Her voice sounded strange, muffled. I realized my ears were still ringing from the explosion. "I don't know," I said. And it was true. I didn't know. I'd seen it take multiple gunshot wounds that should have killed anything on Earth. I'd seen it survive an explosion and come out still moving. Maybe the fire had finished it. Maybe it was out there in the woods right now, lying dead in the leaves. Or maybe it was healing. Maybe it was waiting. Maybe it was even more angry now. We stayed there in the dirt until the fire trucks came. Someone had seen the flames. Jim Holloway, probably, or one of the other neighbors whose property backed up against ours. I heard the sirens coming from a long way off, getting closer. And by the time the first truck arrived, the barn was just a skeleton of burning timber and collapsing beams. The firefighters asked what happened. I told them it was an accident. Diesel fuel leak. Lit propane torch. Everything went up. They looked at me like they didn't quite believe it, but what were they going to say? They'd seen rural accidents before. People died on farms all the time from stupid mistakes. Nobody asked about, the claw marks on my shoulder. Nobody asked why Devon and I were both armed. Me with a shotgun and her with a kitchen knife tucked into her belt. Nobody asked about the tracks in the yard, the massive footprints that led from the barn to the tree line, some of them showing clear as day in the mud. Or maybe they saw and just didn't want to know. Maybe it was easier to believe in accidents than to believe in what those tracks meant. By the time the sun came up, the barn was rubble. The firefighters had left. We were alone again, sitting on the porch steps, watching the smoke still rising from the ruins. "We need to call someone," Devon said. "The sheriff, Fish and Wildlife. Someone. And tell them what? That a monster attacked us? We have evidence, the tracks, wrecks, the damage. I looked at her. She was covered in soot and dirt, her hair singed on one side, her hands blistered from carrying the propane torch. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night. Nobody's going to believe us, I said. You know that. They'll think we're crazy or lying or making excuses for negligence. And even if they did believe us, what would they do? Send a hunting party into the woods? Get more people killed? She was quiet for a long time. Then, so we just, what? Pretend it didn't happen? We survive, I said. We rebuild. We stay armed and we stay alert and we make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. That was 2 years ago. I never went back to long-haul trucking. Couldn't do it. The thought of being away from the farm overnight, of leaving it unguarded, made my chest tight with panic. I picked up local timber routes instead. Day runs where I'm home by dark, never more than an hour away if Devin needs me. Except Devin isn't here anymore. She lasted 6 months. 6 months of jumping at every sound, of checking the windows constantly, of waking up screaming from nightmares. She got counseling, told the therapist she had PTSD from a bear attack. The therapist gave her pills that didn't help and told her to practice mindfulness. Finally, she told me she couldn't do it anymore. She packed up her truck and moved to Portland, got a job in a coffee shop, lives in an apartment where she's never more than 20 feet from other people. She calls once a week, always during daylight hours. We don't talk about what happened. We don't talk about the farm. We talk about her coworkers and the weather and anything except the truth. I sold the livestock. Couldn't protect them. And I couldn't watch them die. The chickens went to Jim Holloway, who asked too many questions I didn't answer. I kept the farm running just for the berry crops, enough to maintain the property, to keep up appearances, to make sure the land doesn't look abandoned. Because I can't leave. I hired Miguel to help with day work. He's young, early 20s, needs the money and doesn't ask questions about why I won't let him work past sunset. He's a good worker and I pay him cash under the table. Sometimes I think about warning him, about telling him what's out there. But what would I say? And would he believe me? I spent every dime I had left after the insurance claim, which was a fraction of the actual damage, on security, industrial lighting around the property perimeter, motion sensors, cameras that actually work, military grade with night vision, a generator system with enough fuel to run for weeks, if the power goes out again, and weapons. I've got an arsenal now that would make a militia member nervous. The social costs have been high. Beth, the woman I'd been seeing, left me after 3 months of my refusal to stay in town overnight. I couldn't explain it to her, couldn't tell her why I had to be home before dark every single day. She thought I was seeing someone else. I let her believe that. It was easier than the truth. Jim Holloway stopped coming by after I yelled at him for showing up at dusk without calling first. I scared him, I think. The old Jim would have pushed back, would have demanded an explanation. But something in my eyes must have told him not to ask. I'm 43 years old and I don't have friends anymore. I have acquaintances, people I do business with. Miguel, who works for me but doesn't know me. Devin, who loves me but can't be near me. The tracks came back last winter. I found them at the edge of my cleared perimeter, pressed into the snow. The same massive prints, the same finger marks. I followed them with my rifle and a spotlight, tracked them for maybe 100 yards into the woods. They just ended. Didn't fade or get obscured. They just ended, like whatever made them had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. Or maybe it climbed. Maybe it went up into the trees and waited for me to follow a little farther. I didn't follow any farther. Sometimes late at night I hear sounds from the forest. Movement, branches breaking. And sometimes very rarely I hear that growl, that almost speech. It's distant now, maybe a mile away, but I know what it is. I know what's out there. I've thought about leaving, selling the farm, walking away, starting over somewhere else. Devin wants me to do it. She's begged me to do it. But I can't, because if I leave, someone else will buy this property. Some family looking for a quiet rural life. Some young couple wanting to homestead. They'll move in and fix up the house and plant crops and have kids, and they won't know what's out there in those woods. They won't be prepared. And one night, maybe on a Tuesday in October when there's no moon, something will come out of the trees, something that shouldn't exist but does. Something that kills because it wants to, because it can, and those people won't have weapons or lights or any idea what they're facing, so I stay. I'm sitting on the porch right now, writing this. It's late afternoon, still a couple hours until dark. Miguel left an hour ago, and I'm alone on the property. The rifle is within arm's reach, and the shotgun is loaded in the house. The generators are fueled and ready. The lights are checked and functioning. The sun is getting lower. I'm not afraid anymore, not the way I was that first night. Fear like that can't be sustained. It burns through you and leaves something else behind. Vigilance, determination. A kind of grim acceptance that this is my life now. I'm the guard on the wall, the watcher in the darkness, the man who stays because someone has to stay. The sun is lower still. In an hour, I'll go inside and lock the doors. I'll turn on the lights and check the cameras and settle in for another night of waiting. Watching. Listening for sounds that might be wind in the trees or might be something else. I'm 43 years old, and this is what I am now. This is my purpose. This is why I'm still here. The light is fading. Something moves at the tree line. Probably a deer. Probably nothing. But I pick up the rifle anyway and watch the shadows deepen between the trees. And I wait. I'm always waiting now. The sun touches the horizon, and the shadows grow longer. And somewhere out there in the woods, something that killed my dog and terrorized my sister and burned in diesel fire is doing what I'm doing. Waiting. Because this isn't over. It's never over. This is just what we do now. Me on one side of the light and it on the other. Waiting. Watching. Both of us knowing that one night eventually we'll finish what we started. I used to wonder if the gun would be enough. Now I know it won't be. But I'm still here. And when it comes again, because it will come again, I'll be ready. The sun is almost down now. Time to go inside. But I'll be watching. I'm always watching. That's what Ashfords do. We don't run.